We're going to talk about Mother's Day. If it's one hard sermon of the year for me to preach, it's today. For any man to get up and talk about mothering, very foreign. So I come at it from male perspective, but I come at it also because I was gifted with a great mom. It makes it easy to preach about what a good mom is because I just think about most days living in our house. It really wasn't that traumatic at all. It was really a good experience. And I think about the wonderful things that she's taught us, the way she is still to this day. We can always count on Mom. The faith of a mother. Abraham Lincoln once said, "No one is poor who had a godly mother." And to that I would say, amen. What defines a mother? What things are expected of a mother? What kind of things do mothers teach us? Oh, they can teach us a lot. Pastor Joe Detter said this: mothers teach us about religion because they always say, you'd better pray that comes out of the carpet. They teach us about time travel because if you don't straighten up, I'm going to knock you into next week. They teach us about foresight. Make sure you wear clean underwear just in case you're in an accident. They teach us about gymnastics and contortion. Look at that dirt on the back of your neck. They teach us about osmosis. Shut your mouth and eat your dinner. They teach us about envy. There are millions of children around the world who don't have parents like you do. They teach us about the weather. It looks like a tornado went through your room. And they teach us about the circle of life. I brought you into this world, and I can take... Boy, you finished that one for me. That must have went around here a little bit. That's pretty violent there, isn't it? But in all actuality, motherhood is something that's not easy. It really isn't. Somewhere between the youthful energy of a teenager and the golden years of a one's life, there lives a marvelous and loving person known as mother. A mother is a curious mixture of patience, kindness, understanding, discipline, industriousness, purity, and love. A mother can be at one and the same time, both a lovelorn counselor to a heartsick daughter and a head football coach to an athletic son. A mother can sew the tiniest stitch in the material for that dainty prom dress, and she is equally experienced in threading through the heaviest traffic in her SUV. A mother is the only creature on earth who can cry when she's happy, laugh when she's heartbroken, and work when she's feeling ill. A mother is as gentle as a lamb and as strong as a giant. Only a mother can appear so weak and helpless, and yet be it the same one who puts the fruit jar cover on so tightly even Dad can't get it off. A mother is a picture of helplessness when Dad is near, and a marvel of resourcefulness when she's all alone. A mother has an angelic voice of the member of the celestial choir as she sings a Brahms lullaby to a babe held tight in her arms, yet at the same voice can dwarf the sound of an amplifier when she calls her boys in for supper. A mother has a fascinating ability to be almost everywhere at once, and she alone can somehow squeeze an enormous amount of living into an average day. But there's no greater thrill in life than to point to that wonderful woman and be able to say to all the world, "That's my mother." But not everything about being mother is a joyful thing. There are trials and tribulations in mothering. And so we look at this story in 1 Kings chapter 17. You probably never thought we'd read an Old Testament mother story, but guess what? It's a neat story about a mother. She was a widow, but she was still a mother at Zarephath. Let's start in 1 Kings 17. Let's start after verse 7. It says, "Then the Lord said to Elijah, go and live in the village of Zarephath near the city of Sidon, and I have instructed a widow there to feed you." So he went to Zarephath, and as he arrived at the gates of the village, he saw a widow gathering sticks, and he asked her, "Would you please bring me a little water in a cup?" And she was going to get it, and he called her, "Bring me a little bite of bread too." Now let's go back up to verse 7 that I intentionally skipped. Why was this a big deal? Because in verse 7 it says, "But after a while the brook dried up, for there was no rainfall anywhere in the land." There was a drought, no rainfall, crops were bad, and they were out there gathering sticks. And then this person comes up, "Bring me a bite of bread too." But she said in verse 12, "I swear by the Lord your God that I don't have a single piece of bread in the house. I only have a handful of flour left in a jar and a little cooking oil in the bottom of the jug. I was just gathering a few sticks to cook this last meal, and then my son and I will," what? "Die." But Elijah said to her, "Don't be afraid. Go ahead and do just what you said, but make a little bread for me first." The audacity of this stranger to walk into this woman's house during a drought and say, "Take your last batch of everything you have and serve me first." Now, moms, I know mothers enough that if you really want to make a mom mad, just mess with her cubs. That's all you have to do. Mess with her kids, and she'll get mad. You want me to take my only resources that I have and feed you when I was planning on eating this with my son. And basically, that's all we had. We were going to then die. Yep, that's what I want you to say. It's what I want you to do. "For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says, there will always be flour and oil left in your containers until the time the Lord sends rain that the crops grow again." If you would just do this, you're going to find out that the Lord's going to provide you a miracle. And in verse 15, "So she did as Elijah said, and she and Elijah and her family continued to eat for many days. There was always enough flour and olive oil left in the containers, just as the Lord had promised through Elijah." Wouldn't that be wonderful? You go to the refrigerator, pour some milk out of there, and it just refills itself automatically. You take an egg out of the container, just another one reappears. Boy, that would save on groceries, wouldn't it? It's amazing. Sometime later, the woman's son became sick, and he grew worse and worse. And finally he died, and then she said to Elijah, "O man of God, what have you done to me? Have you come here to point out my sins and kill my son?" But Elijah replied, "Give me your son." And he took the child's body from her arms, carried him up into the stairs to the room where he was staying, and laid the body on his bed. And then Elijah cried out to the Lord, "Oh, Lord my God, why have you brought tragedy to this widow who has opened her home to me, causing her son to die?" And he stretched himself out over the child 3 times and cried out to the Lord, "Oh, Lord my God, please let this child's life return to him." And the Lord heard Elijah's prayer, and the life of the child returned, and he revived. And then Elijah brought him down from the upper room and gave him to his mother. "Look," he said, "your son is alive." And the woman told Elijah, "Now I know for sure that you're a man of God and that the Lord truly speaks through you." May the Lord add his blessing to the reading of his word today. What were the trials of this mother? First of all, she lost all her necessities of life. The drought was there. She had nothing. She lost everything. She went to her cupboard, and the cupboards were what? They were bare. Gathering a few sticks for a fire. The rest of the flour she had, some little bit of oil she had, going to mix it up, make a batch of whatever, and they were planning on that being their last meal. There was no welfare program back there. They couldn't go get anything from anybody. This was it. The lack. And mothers always want to provide for their children and pick up after their kids and take care of them. There was this one teacher, and she was teaching the whole classroom about magnets, about how She was teaching the letter M, and she was talking about magnets, and she wanted to bring the lesson to an end, and she wanted to review it, and she says, here's what I want you to do. My name starts with M, and I pick up things. What am I? And the answer should be magnet, but this boy stood up and instantly said, my mom. That's what mothers do. They want to provide. They want to pick up after you. They want to do things. But she couldn't. She lost that. And Elijah, despite what was going on, asked that you serve me first. What kind of a man does that? But Elijah did that. It was an act of faith. Next thing she lost was her spouse. We find out then in verses 8 and 9, she was a widow. She lost her spouse, and because she lost her spouse, she lost her support. Back then, it was a very patriarchal society. The men provided. The women, for the most part, stayed home and raised the children. It was something that happened. She lost her spouse, lost her support. And in verse 17, we find out she lost what? Her son. Now, could your week get any worse? Losing a child? That would be unbearable pain. Lost her son. But the faith of this mother, what did she do in verses 13 through 15? She obeyed the directives of Elijah. This mother loved her child, willing to cook this last meal for this child and die with this child. But she loved that child even more and thought, I'm going to obey the directives of this man of God because I really have faith in this man. She put her faith in God, and what happened? She was blessed. She was blessed. I think every mom in here that puts their faith in God and raises their children in the admonition of the Lord like this, I think, is blessing their children beyond just this earthly life. I will always be indebted to my mother. Whether she's here or with the Lord, I will not forget her. Because she has made me who I am. She's part of who I am. When I preach, part of her's coming out. Because I can't help it. I'm half her. And so I think of this often on what legacy we leave our children. What do we do? This lady's heart was breaking when her child died. However, she did everything the Lord said. And guess what? Her child then dies. Why does life treat people like this? How many times have I heard that question? But life's not fair. And it wasn't. She obeyed God. She did everything she could. She had faith. She was housing Elijah in a room upstairs, and she gave him everything he asked for and did what the Lord wanted, and still her child died. And notice in verse 18, the reality of life. When her child died, she dealt with a drought. She dealt with the loss of her spouse. She dealt with empty cupboards. But I'll tell you, when her son died, that's when her world fell apart. What do we see? The rawness of life with a mother and her child. We see anger in this. Why have you come here? After everything that he had done for her, filling up her cupboards when they were empty. The rawness of life for this grieving mother that lost her child. Ask this man of God, why have you come here? We see anger in its rawness of form right here. Why? We see guilt. There's something maybe in her past she was guilty of or thought she was guilty of. And then she says, you're here to point out my sins, aren't you? That's what you're here to do. And then we see blame and kill my son. This is the rawness of life. If you want to really bring out what's inside of you, even as a father, I've known this, and mothers do the same thing. We all do it. When somebody messes with our children, it brings something out in us. And she was angry. She thought he was trying to do something because of a guilt in her past. And how many times have we done that? Blame something that happens now on something that we did in the past. And basically was blaming this man of God for the death of her son. What was the blessings for this mother? What was the blessings? Well, in verses 15 and 16, we see that her financial support was reestablished, wasn't it? What happens when we give our problems and needs to God? Will they just automatically stop? No, but the answer will become more clear. I wish I could say as your pastor, if you would just pray 3 times, and on that 4th time, your prayers will be answered. I can't say that with surety. I do know that God answers our prayers. But sometimes He doesn't answer them the way we want them answered, or He doesn't answer them in the time frame we would like Him to answer them in. But He always answers our prayers. And sometimes He answers our prayers through the advice of our mothers. This son was fed for days and days and days because of the obedience of a godly mother. But this child, life is so frail. This child, for some reason, died. But when she was resurrected, her faith in God was restored. Her son was brought back to life in verses 19 through 23. Her son, isn't that a great story? Couldn't you imagine that? Having somebody come in your home and do that. And then verse 24, her faith in God was restored. This message is for all of us. I know we focus in on a mother's love for a child. And I know when I read this story, I can just imagine the tragedy that took place. We go from thinking you're eating your last meal to then having a miracle take place with your grocery bill, everything being restored, and then your son, you see him out playing, enjoying life, and then all of a sudden your son passes away in front of you in the house where he lives. It goes from tragedy to triumph to tragedy. We don't know how long it was, but this is the rawness of life. But that mother still decided, if I'm going to do anything, I'm going to obey God. With obeying God, however, comes the reality of life, the rawness of life, that sometimes we feel things we shouldn't feel, but they're still there. This mother felt guilt, anger, and blame, but still, she allowed this man of God to wrap his arms around that child, pray for that child, and God chose to resurrect that child to newness of life again. Her faith in God was restored. It's interesting when we look at these stories. Lord, what do you want to teach us? What do you really want to teach us? I usually put points to ponder, and I got points to ponder, but I called them from lessons from this mother. What can we learn from this mom today? I really think life has a way of disturbing our happiness. This is for all of us. Life has a way of disturbing our happiness, but God has come to give us joy. Man, I've noticed, someone once told me that the days are long, but the years are short with your children. And I'll tell you one thing, that is so true. I remember when I used to have sick kids. You never thought you were going to get through that night, that day. It just drug on forever. But now I'm a grandparent, and I say, where did those years go? They evaporated. I don't know where they went. And during that walk with the Lord, others, there's going to be a lot of things that disturb your happiness. But I know one thing that brings Twyla lots of joy now. When she knows that her kids are walking with the Lord. All those sleepless nights, all those trips to the hospital, all those times where we don't know what's going on in Haiti, and we don't know what's going on when Josh was out doing his job. He called this morning. Joshua already wished her happy Mother's Day. Matthew sent us an instant message on Facebook saying Happy Mother's Day. You know something? That's the joy right there. Our happiness is based on happenings. But the joy that we have comes from who? The Lord. And life is sometimes not happy, but we can have the joy of the Lord. The second thing, God is at work, moms, in our lives, even though sometimes we don't see or understand His ways. She learned through her adversity. How many of us moms have ever learned through adversity? Any of you moms learned through adversity? I have learned as a son that I've learned some of my biggest lessons through adversity. Because you don't forget it. It drills it deep into your soul when you learn something the hard way. It really does. And there are times when your mother says, kids, don't do that. Don't do that. And you decide to do it anyway. And you have to pay a consequence. And sometimes those consequences are minor and sometimes they're very severe. But a good mom, you know what a good mom will do? They'll still love you. They still will. You'll have to pay your recompense for whatever you did, but a good mom will love you through it. God is at work in our lives, even though sometimes we do not see or understand His ways. This woman didn't understand what was going on. You want me to do what? Okay, I'll do it because God's telling me to. But I don't want to. And she was blessed. The third thing, always obey God even though the world would advise you differently. Always obey God when the world would advise you differently. 1 Corinthians 1:27, it says, He uses the simple things of the world to confound the wise. 1 Corinthians 1:27, the simple things. Those little simple statements your mother makes year after year after year. There's wisdom in those little things. Those things that you hear read at eulogies when mothers pass away, that everybody laughs at because they know how funny they are, but how true they are as well. There's legacies being passed down. And some of the fondest memories I have are when me and Mom would just talk and she would direct me on where I should go with advice when it comes to whatever it was. But she always pointed towards the Lord. What does the Lord want you to do? I can always remember her advising me that way. The last thing, God is faithful regardless of the circumstances. This lady had some bad circumstances, but God was faithful. I read this little story. It's funny. The sounds of Mother's Day, a mixer whirls out of control, then stops abruptly as a voice cries, I'm telling. A dog barks and another voice says, get his paws out of there. Mom has to eat that. Minutes pass and finally, Dad, where's the chili sauce? Then don't you dare bleed on Mom's breakfast. The breakfast is fairly standard. A water tumbler of juice, 5 pieces of black bacon that snaps in half when you breathe on them, a mound of eggs that would feed a Marine division, and 4 pieces of cold toast. The kids line up by the bed to watch you eat and from time to time ask why you're not drinking your Kool-Aid or touching the cantaloupe with black olives on top of it spelling Mom Later in the day, after you've decided it's easier to move into a new house than clean the kitchen, you return to your bed where, if you're wise, you'll reflect on this day. For the first time, your children have given instead of received. They have offered up to you the sincerest form of flattery, trying to emulate what you do for them on a daily basis. It's a joy to watch children learn the lessons from you and then want to give back to you. Isn't it, moms? Irma Bombeck wrote this piece, and I close with this. Dear Mom, as I walk through my museum of memories, I owe you for your time, day and night. I owe you for your example, consistent and dependable. I owe you for your support, stimulating and challenging. I owe you for your humor, sparky and quick. I owe you for your counsel, wise and quiet. I owe you for your humility, genuine and gracious. I owe you for your hospitality, smiling and warm. I owe you for your insight, keen and honest. I owe you for your flexibility, patient and joyful. I owe you for your sacrifices, numerous and quickly forgotten. I owe you for your faith, solid and sure. I owe you for your hope, ceaseless and indestructible. I owe you for your love, devoted and deep. So moms out there, happy Mother's Day. Amen. For those of you, every one of you has a mom. If you can say, I love you to your mom, do it today. And for those of you that your moms have passed, I pray right now you would focus on what they've taught you. And there's those groups of women in here today that maybe they were never mothers. And I would say to you, there are children out there that could use a good, godly example. And I've watched my parents foster numerous children that were not theirs. But guess what? They gave them the love that a mother and father should give their own children. Amen? We can do that. Love you, Mom. And happy Mother's Day to everybody. Let's pray.